Hi friends, so have you seen in the Boston Globe, if you follow that, by Stephen Kinzer, he wrote the book Overthrow about American imperialism a while ago, and he's written this article. You may have seen it or heard about it online. It's in an astonishing turn, George Soros and Charles Koch team up to end US forever war policy. Now that sounds like something, it's like we've stepped into the bizarro world. That's what it seems like to me, and I had to do a double take on that. But apparently, of course, I have extreme suspicion and skepticism about this, but of course, anything that looks like it might be in just some way, sort of some people are waking up, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in a moment, but I was just going to sort of read you a little bit from this article by Stephen Kinzer. Besides being billionaires and spending much of their fortune to promote pet causes, the leftist financier George Soros and the right-wing Koch brothers have little in common. I'm not sure about that really, but they all love meddling in countries' democracies. They could be seen as polar opposites. Soros is an old-fashioned New Deal liberal. The Koch brothers are fire-breathing right-wingers who dream of cutting taxes and dismantling government. They also are the Koch brothers are actually trying to rewrite the Constitution, and they're actually trying to get different states involved in that. You might have seen, I talked about this on one of my posts. So now they have found something to agree on. The United States must end its forever war and adopt an entirely new foreign policy. In one of the most remarkable partnerships in modern American political history, Soros and Charles Koch, the more active of the two brothers, are joining in to finance a new foreign policy think tank in Washington. It will promote an approach to the world based on diplomacy and restraint rather than threats, sanctions, and bombing. This is a radical notion in Washington, where every major think tank promotes some variant of neocon militarism or liberal interventionism. Soros and Koch are uniting to revive the fading vision of a peaceable United States. The street cred they bring from both ends of the political spectrum, along with the money they are providing, will make this new think tank an off-pitch voice for statesmanship amid a Washington chorus that promotes brinkmanship. This is big, said Trita, a former president of the National Iranian American Council and a co-founder of the new think tank. He's, from what I understand, he's actually in some ways quite good, Trita, so it shows, quote, it shows how important ending endless war is if they're willing to put aside their differences and get together on this project. We're going to challenge the basis of American foreign policy in a way that has not been done in at least the last quarter century. I mean, sort of, you'd almost think this is kind of like an onion piece in a way, wouldn't you? Because these two are the last people that you would think might be doing this. Now, as I said, I'm sort of skeptical, but if there's any truth to it, and if they don't end up going pear-shaped at some point, like some of these other think tanks, which are really about militarism or fooling the public or whatever, whatever. If it doesn't go that way, then that's great. Since peaceful foreign policy was the founding principle of the United States, it's appropriate that the name of this think tank harken back to history. It will be called the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, an homage to John Quincy Adams, who is a seminal speech on Independence Day in 1821, declared that the United States goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own, end quote. The Quincy Institute will promote a foreign policy based on the live and let live principle. The Institute plans to open its doors in September 2019 and hold an official inauguration later in the autumn. Its funding donors, Soros Open Society Foundation and the Charles Koch Foundation, have each contributed $500,000 to fund its takeoff. A handful of individual donors have joined to add another $800,000. I wonder who they are. By next year, the Institute hopes to have $3.5 million budget and a staff of policy experts who will churn out material for use in Congress and in public debates. Hiring is underway. Among Parsi's co-founders are several well-known critics of American foreign policy, including Susan DiMaggio, who has spent decades promoting negotiated alternatives to conflict with China, Iran, and North Korea. the historian and essayist Stephen Wertheim, and the anti-militarist author and retired Army Colonel Andrew Basevich. The Quincy Institute will invite both progressives and anti-interventionists, conservatives, to consider a new, less militarized approach to policy, end quote, Basevich said when asked why he signed up. Quote, "We oppose endless counterproductive war. We want to restore this pursuit of peace to the nation's foreign policy agenda." Okay, so I'll put a link to that. It's in the Boston Globe. This was the 30th of June, 2019. It's an opinion piece by Stephen Kinzer. So, anyway, that's, anything that is sort of actually, I mean, if the motivation is in any way real to promote peace and end these appalling immoral interventionist imperialist wars, well, that's great. And here's what I think about possibly the motivation to this for George Soros and this particular Koch brother. I'm sort of thinking some of it may be the fact that they're very frightened about the possible Third World War coming, or at least the the attack on Iran, which, seems to be becoming more and more likely. Just recently now, the British have sort of, they're holding hostage, I think it's some sort of Iranian tanker or something that's is related to Iran, and it's basically holding its hostage, and so the Iranians say, okay, well, we'll find a British tanker and hold that hostage. See, and once they do that, once the Iranians do what is fair enough, then of course the people like John Bolton, who are just itching and have been wanting to invade Iran for decades, will sort of go, see, look, they've taken hostage one of our allied tankers, so that's enough now to attack them, that sort of thing. So people like George Soros and this Koch brother, they both probably can see that, well, the Koch brothers actually have, oil interests. That's where I think they made a lot of their money, right? So they can probably see this is very bad for business. That's one thing. And they probably also, any sort of violence, that's going to interfere with business is probably, that's not in their business interest. So they've obviously done the maths. They've obviously done, they've sort of thought about the consequences of that particular invasion, and they probably don't see, because Iran could also, as there's all sorts of countries will come to the assistance of Iran if that happens. There'll be problems with Iraq, in Iraq due to that. There'll be the US will get themselves into such a mess. There'll be lots of carnage on both sides, but it won't be good for business for either of these two. And that's sort of my feeling, that it's coming from probably a selfish standpoint from George Soros and the Koch brothers. It's like when YouTube starts to crack down on right-wing white nationalists who are promoting violence. They see that as being bad for business, YouTube. I mean, eventually their censorship comes to the left, and they've been censoring with algorithms anything that is inconvenient to the national security state, because they're all working, like YouTube is like an arm of the national security state. As Google owns YouTube, and Facebook is a national security state sort of arm, and so is Twitter, really. Instagram is becoming that way because it's owned by Facebook. All these are just propaganda tools, really. And YouTube has started cracking down and banning certain right-wingers, I think. There's some sort of they probably get backlash, of course, from the public when people like Alex Jones say that Sandy Hook was there were crisis actors and things like that, right? But they don't. YouTube doesn't care really about violence per se. They don't care about anything that they care about advertising. So there must have been some other reason besides what they say. The reason is Alex Jones was promoting violence, and yes, he was promoting violence towards the left. If people look into that, he was. I've seen him say that sort of thing. But YouTube, when you see, the left isn't that much of a threat at this point, because they're not promoting violence, and so they're not going to be interfering with business. Eventually, businesses and the capitalist class, whereas white supremacists and nationalists, they're more likely to be interfering with the capitalist class in that they're interfering with business because of the violence and so forth. That's my thoughts on that. Because you have to think about why it's like the mainstream media, they don't care about they care about advertising. They care about their weapons manufacturers advertising and that sort of thing. So they don't want anything that interferes with the war narrative. In fact, they promote the war. They promote war on most mainstream media. And so they don't want anybody. So they only care about advertising dollars. The corporate-owned media. That's why they love Trump, because that like the CBS Les Moonves. Was it CBS? Les Moonves, who's now been sacked because of sexual harassment, sexual assault, etc. He said, Trump is bad for the country, but he's good for business. See, it's just all about advertising dollars. And so anyway, YouTube, just quickly about YouTube. So that's my thoughts about why they are cracking down, of course, on the left, but they're not actually banning sort of channels on YouTube like they are with the right. Because, as I said, the left is not so much a violence threat. And it hasn't become probably big enough to be a threat to their business. So, anyway, that's my thoughts about the Koch brothers and George Soros, that they're probably concerned about what might happen if Iran is attacked. Iran will cause all sorts of strife for their businesses and for their future meddling, because they both love to meddle in other countries' democracies, both of them, both the Koch brothers. And in fact, Koch brothers fund, from what I understand, Islamophobic organizations. They fund right-wing warmongering think tanks and all that kind of thing. But who knows too, if this may be, it might be a temporary thing, because they think Trump's going to be in for the next till 2024, which is quite possible, because there is no real alternative. If they put Joe Biden up, which I think he's not going to be up now, it's probably going to be Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris drove a stake through Joe Biden's heart at that Dem debate, so it's probably going to end up being, it'd probably be Kamala Harris. It should be Bernie Sanders, although Bernie Sanders is still an imperialist as far as I'm concerned, but it should be, in that he's got more likelihood of beating Trump, much more likelihood of beating Trump than any of the other people. But I doubt very much whether he will get through the primaries. I'm sure that the DNC will make sure it is rigged again, and I don't think Bernie Sanders will challenge it, or maybe he will, who knows, but it doesn't matter. The national security state and the military-industrial complex, it's seamless. Whether it's Bush, Obama, Trump, it's seamless, and they keep meddling. So anyway, if this actually turns out to be something good, the Quincy, Institute or whatever it is, and it actually is doing what it says it's supposed to be doing. I mean, it's Trita Parsi is a good choice. I could think of some other people that would be really good, and I don't know. I don't know. There's people that are very openly critical. I don't know about those other two people I mentioned. I haven't looked into them. But anyway, so that's a good thing, so I suppose that's some good news, but I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, I'll believe it when I see that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. So one can only hope. And so I'll just read you a little something from Matthew Ho. It's about the NDAA. He said, "It's important to note that although Democrats put a show on Friday to oppose, quote, unauthorized war with Iran, nearly all of them still voted for the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. The 8 votes against the NDAA were 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans and 1 independent. Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, did not vote in that. I don't know if it's because he was away. I don't know if you can actually get somebody to vote for you. But there was only 8 out of all those senators that voted nay to that. So he said, so Matthew Ho goes on, the NDAA was going to pass regardless if Democrats were so concerned about the death and suffering a war with Iran would inflict, let alone the other 12-plus wars we are currently in. They would have voted against the NDAA in its totality rather than risk defying their weapons and war industry benefactors and bosses. Matthew Ho suggests calling those 8 men and women, if they are your senators, and thank them. I'll see if I can rustle up who that is, and I'll post them there and you can thank them. I was surprised to see Klobuchar and Booker, I think Cory Booker, voted against it. Now, both of those people are total imperialists. They totally are, so I'm not sure if this is just for the optics of it, you know, showing people trying to pretend like they're not for war. You know, this is for their 2020 campaign. These people do all sorts of things to try and pretend they're progressive before, you know, so they can get elected. And then after that, it's just Rafferty's rules. It's just, you know, they do whatever the hell they want. So, and the last thing I want to talk about just for right now is how Israel has a troll army of thousands, partly funded by a government department. This is the management of strategic affairs is dedicated to a global quote-unquote war against the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement for Palestinian rights. To conceal its involvement, the ministry has admitted to working through front groups that, quote, do not want to expose their connection with the state. The troll army ACT.IL, ACT.IL, is one of the many such groups. It focuses on spreading Israeli propaganda online. What does it do with its $1 million budget? ACT.IL is run by a former Israeli spy who has argued that his outfit is involved in, quote, a new kind of war, end quote. While ACT.IL publicly denies being supported by the Israeli government, the group's chief executive has admitted in Hebrew to working closely with Israeli ministries and in English that his staff are mostly former Israeli spies. His name is Yarden Ben Yosef. Last year he explained his group's methods in an article for a journal aimed at Israeli diplomats. He lamented that in Gaza in that May, quote, the Palestinian narrative prevailed in world media over the Israeli one. Israeli snipers had massacred more than 60 unarmed Palestinian protesters on a single day during the Great March of Return protests, injuring thousands more, end quote. So anyway, there's an article, you can read it, it's on the Electronic Intifada. You can find it at electronicintifada.net. It's called How Israeli Spies Are Flooding Facebook and Twitter. And you can see how they, in this article, you can see how they're actually, anything that is challenging the Israeli narrative that they're defending themselves and that the Palestinians are causing all the problems and yada, 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 anything like that. This particular group and other groups that are Hasbro trolls come in and they try to completely change the narrative, and they actually attack polls that are saying like during Eurovision, they attacked these polls that were saying should Eurovision be boycotted. So they went in and they changed the results. It would actually be a yes vote for boycotting Eurovision, and then they admitted that they actually changed the poll votes, and it became much less. It became much more of a 50-50, or in their favor actually even, that no, not to boycott. So that's what they go around and do. And I've noticed that particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a great increase, a huge increase really in trolling, that kind of trolling, not just the Israeli narrative, but also the military-industrial complex, sort of promoting the idea of that, you know, anybody who talks remotely about not going into war or peace or anything, you're either called a Putin puppet or you're called a something or other. You're basically, you'll be dumped on. There'll be masses of people come on, or there'll always be masses of anything that's sort of to do with meddling or promoting war. You'll see that the top comment will be something that's really unfortunate. And the same thing happens with misogyny. You'll find that misogynists get they pile on in various sort of articles, and they'll always have their comments up at the top. I know that there are, you know, sort of there are sort of, you know, these men's rights groups that actually enjoy doing that. They get together and they go and find things to troll and leave really misogynist comments. The military has thousands of military people who are being paid to go in and change the narrative in any of the social media comment sections. So basically, you know, when we say, you know, you can basically call the social media, pretty much all of it, arms of the Israeli lobby, arms of the military-industrial complex. the national security state, the surveillance state. That's what they are. And, and the amount of trolls, there's tens of thousands now, tens of thousands of paid people from, the Israel lobby, from the military-industrial complex, the national security state, the surveillance state. It's basically like, we're swamped. You only have to look at the comment sections online. It's appalling, and it's sort of so overwhelming. You really can't, pretty much can't beat it, because it's such a massive, there's such a massive trolling going on. It's really, really sad. And if it's not that, it's algorithm censorship. I was even, when I posted yesterday my post about Abby Martin's analysis of all the different Democratic candidates that are running for the 2020 presidential election and what their position is on Palestine and Israel. And I tried to put a card into one of the videos that shows a suggested link to an Empire File video. One of them that I was trying to do was how Palestine was colonized. I think that's what the name of it was, and it wouldn't allow me to put the link in. It would not show the link. It's actually sort of suppressed that particular link, so you can't actually link to it in these card sections. You could link to some other programs on YouTube by the Empire Files that were related to that issue, but you could not put that in. And I often find, if I do anything about Palestine and Israel, and other people have found this, that anything about Palestine, you tend to have it sort of suppressed and hardly gets any views. And some people that find, if they have any, I don't have a monetized site, but some people who do, they find that they get demonetized, and it gets suppressed by algorithms, and then they hardly get anybody seeing it, or that kind of thing. So we have a major censorship going on about with anything that's anti-war, anything that's criticizing Israel and the apartheid state. It's very sad that that's how it is. So anyway, that's something to keep in mind when you see, these Hasbro trolls piling on to any thread that is critical of Israel, then calling people anti-Semitic if they're criticizing apartheid Israel. You get Jeremy Corbyn being called anti-Semitic for criticizing the massacre of Palestinians at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza. This is what happens. People actually get, like university students actually get things like free air balloon rides and stuff for doing this kind of thing. That's been proven. This is not made up. So anyway, that's what's happening. People are getting paid millions of dollars to go around protecting the narrative of Israel. So, and protecting and dumping on anybody who's a peace activist, or is anybody who's anti-war and so forth. So, and if you haven't got that, you've got algorithms and all that kind of thing. So, it's kind of sad. Anyway, you may want to check out the Israel, the Electronic Intifada also did a documentary which was banned for quite a while, and now you can see it on their site, and it's called The Lobby. So check that out. And check out the most recent video I did if you're interested in the positions of any of the Democratic candidates on Israel and Palestine. Check out my most recent video done July 4th? It's Abby Martin has looked into that, and she did a whole series of tweets about the various candidates and where they are. It's very interesting, and it gives you an insight into that pretty much they're all have a bit of a checkered sort of at best, a checkered kind of a past in relation to Israel, and some of them are just full on pro-Israel. They don't care one iota about Palestinians. So check that out. It's very interesting. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please click the like button if you like this content. Please subscribe and click the notifications bell if you haven't already. Otherwise, you don't receive any updates. And I always welcome comments. So please feel free to leave comments. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Fake Signals from Vega. Till next time. Bye for now.